The camera never lies, and sometimes it captures moments so unbelievable that without the footage, they would sound like nothing more than wild stories. Zoos are meant to be places where people safely observe animals, but every now and then, something completely unexpected unfolds behind the fences. From shocking encounters to bizarre animal behavior. Today we're revealing 13 of the most horrifying pet attacks caught on camera. Number 13. A dangerous photo op with an alligator. Some people risk their lives for the perfect photo. That is exactly what happened to a family who spotted an alligator lying motionless by the water's edge during a walk through the jungle. Alligators and crocodiles do this often. Staying still is how they conserve energy, especially once they are out of the water and away from the cooling effect it provides. To onlookers, it can look like the animal is asleep, or even harmless. Seeing this, the family of tourists approached without hesitation. First, they took photos from a distance, then moved closer. The biggest mistake came when a woman reached out to touch it. The alligator lunged instantly, spinning toward her and clamping its jaws down on her hand in one motion. Screams broke out, and the group scattered. Luckily, she pulled free before the animal could apply its full bite force, a force strong enough to crush bone. With alligators, there is usually no warning window, and there is no outrunning that speed at close range. A photo is never worth testing the patience of an alligator, so let the sleeping gator lie. Number 12. Playing with fire in the jungle. The first rule of any safari or jungle encounter is not to provoke the wildlife. Two content creators broke that rule and decided to get a reaction out of an elephant. They clapped, shouted, and waved their arms, doing anything they could to grab its attention. At first, the elephant ignored them, but its irritation became obvious in its body language. Then, in an instant, everything changed. Ears spread wide, head lowered, and trumpeting a warning, it charged. The men ran for their lives, with several tons of a furious, fast-moving animal closing the gap behind them. An elephant can outrun a human easily over short distances, reaching speeds that a sprinting person simply cannot match. And a charge like this is rarely a bluff once the ears go back and the head drops. Seconds later, the elephant broke off the chase and turned back. Astonishingly, the same men returned and repeated the provocation. They seem to forget that elephants are not just enormous, they are also remarkably intelligent, capable of recognizing individual human faces and voices years later. And they do not forget being harassed. The next person to cross that same elephant's patience might not get a second warning. Number 11. Terrence Garner and his pigs. In October 2012, 69-year-old Terry Vance Garner walked out to feed his hogs on his farm near Bandon on the Oregon coast and never came back. When his family went looking for him hours later, they found his dentures scattered in the pig pen. That was the only part of him left fully intact. Several of his hogs weighed over 700 pounds each, and most of his remains had already been consumed. Investigators could not determine an exact cause of death. A pathologist examined what remained and could not identify whether Garner suffered a heart attack and collapsed before the pigs reacted, or whether one of the hogs knocked him down first. Coos County's district attorney called it so doggone weird that police had to investigate every possibility, including foul play, before settling on the most likely explanation: a medical emergency, followed by an ordinary pig instinct to root and scavenge, turned into something almost nobody expected from an animal we consider one of the more docile creatures on a farm. Garner's case remains one of the strangest documented farm deaths in American history, but pigs are far from the only supposedly gentle animal capable of a total personality reversal. Number 10. Too close with a panda. Bears in general trigger an automatic sense of danger. Panda bears somehow do not. They look slow, soft, and harmless, which is exactly the assumption that got a young man in trouble at the Nanchang Zoo in China's Jiangxi province in October 2016. Security cameras caught a man, identified only by his surname, Chen, climbing into the enclosure of Mei Ling, a 12-year-old male panda weighing about 265 pounds. Chen wanted to impress two female companions on the tour. He crept up to the sleeping panda and touched it on the head. Mei Ling wasn't sleeping deeply enough. the panda woke instantly, latched onto Chen's leg the same way it would grab a keeper during play, and pulled him to the ground in what turned into a 5-minute wrestling match caught entirely on camera. Chen eventually pushed the panda off and scrambled out of the enclosure, his trousers torn to shreds, but his body largely unharmed. Zoo staff later said Chen was fortunate that Mei Ling was in a playful mood rather than a defensive one. Alcohol and showing off are a recurring theme in these stories, and nowhere is that clearer than in the next one. Number 9. The man who tried to shake hands with lions. Imagine standing only a few feet from a fully grown lion. Now, imagine climbing in voluntarily. At Hyderabad's Nehru Zoological Park in May 2016, a 35-year-old laborer named Mukesh did exactly that. Heavily intoxicated after drinking with friends earlier that day, Mukesh crossed the safety barricade around the African lion enclosure and swam across the moat toward a lioness named Radhika, calling out to her and reaching out his hand to shake hers. Onlookers screamed and guards shouted for him to turn back, but he seemed entirely unbothered by the danger, later telling police he had wanted to shake hands with the lioness and even fight the lion. A second lion, Krishna, joined Radhika as the crowd's panic grew. What saved Mukesh was a quick-thinking zookeeper named Papaya, who climbed onto a parapet and shouted to pull the lion's attention away from the swimmer, distracting them long enough for staff to reach Mukesh with a long pole and drag him to safety. He walked away completely unharmed and was later sentenced to 4 months in prison and fined a symbolic 100 rupees. The zoo increased security around all of its carnivore enclosures immediately afterward, adding permanent guard posts that had never been needed before that day. Water, it turns out, tempts people into enclosures just as often as alcohol does, and the next story proves that. Number 8. When Common Sense Takes a Vacation, Polar Bear Edition. In April 2009, at the Berlin Zoo, a 32-year-old woman climbed a perimeter fence, pushed through a thick hedge of thorny bushes, scaled a low wall, and jumped directly into the polar bear enclosure's moat during feeding time, when even the zoo's own keepers stay out. Most of the bears were occupied with their meal, but one noticed her immediately and began closing in, as she thrashed in the water, trying to grab the life rings zookeepers threw toward her. The bear bit repeatedly at her legs, arms, and back. At one point, rescuers nearly had her pulled free before she slipped back into the water, putting her within reach of the bear a second time. She was eventually hauled out and rushed to the hospital with severe injuries. Police never identified a clear motive, though she was cited for trespassing once she recovered. The zoo's most famous resident, a young polar bear named Knut, was in the same enclosure the entire time, but was not involved in the attack. Zoo officials made a point afterward of saying they would not be raising the enclosure walls. As one spokesman put it at the time, if a person is determined to climb in, no wall height will stop them. The only real safeguard, he said, was common sense, which is precisely what this story is missing. It was not even the first time that particular enclosure had made headlines. The year before, a different man had jumped into the same moat, convinced that Knut, the zoo's famous cub, looked lonely and needed company. That man escaped unscathed after keepers lured Knut away with a leg of beef. 2 nearly identical incidents at the same enclosure within 12 months made it clear the barrier itself was never really the problem. The next story unfolded on a stage in front of thousands of paying witnesses, and it ended a career overnight. Number 7. The night a tiger nearly killed a Las Vegas legend. For over a decade, Siegfried and Roy performed one of the most successful shows in Las Vegas history, built around live white tigers and lions that Roy Horn had trained since they were cubs. On October 3rd, 2003, during a sold-out performance at the Mirage, on Horn's 59th birthday, a 7-year-old 400-pound white tiger named Manticore strayed off his usual mark toward the edge of the stage. As Horn tried to redirect him, the tiger bit down on his sleeve. Horn tapped its nose lightly with his handheld microphone, and the tiger let go. But as Horn turned to retreat, Manticore leapt, knocked him to the floor, and clamped its jaws around his neck, dragging him off stage in front of a stunned, screaming audience. Stagehands rushed in, discharging a fire extinguisher and prying the tiger's jaws open by hand to free him. Horn survived, but with catastrophic blood loss and what doctors later described as a stroke, either the cause or the consequence of the attack, Accounts differ to this day. He was left partially paralyzed and had to relearn how to walk and talk. The show, one of the most profitable in Las Vegas history, at more than 30,000 performances, without a single serious incident, closed permanently that same night and never reopened in its original form. Horn and his longtime partner Siegfried insisted for years afterward that Manticore was not attacking him, but trying to protect him after he collapsed on stage, dragging him toward the safety of his cage the way tigers move an injured cub. Not everyone who was there that night agrees with that account. The show's animal handler, who was on stage grabbing the tiger by the neck during the attack, later said publicly that he believed the protective version of events was a story built to shield Horn's reputation. Horn defended the animal until the day he died in 2002 from complications of COVID-19, 17 years after the attack that ended his career. Manticore himself lived on quietly behind the scenes for another decade, dying of natural causes in 2014. If a professionally trained tiger could turn on the man who raised it from a cub, the next case shows that wild cats in captivity carry their own version of this same risk. Number 6. Tatiana, the tiger who escaped on Christmas Day. On December 25, 2007, a 4-year-old, 243-pound Siberian tiger named Tatiana somehow got out of her enclosure at the San Francisco Zoo, an enclosure surrounded by a moat and a wall that investigators later discovered measured 12.5 feet, nearly 4 feet short of the federally recommended minimum height. It was not Tatiana's first violent incident. A year earlier, she had clawed and bitten a veteran zookeeper's arm through the enclosure grate during a public feeding, an injury that required multiple surgeries. On Christmas Day, 17-year-old Carlos Souza Jr. and brothers Paul and Kulber Dhaliwal were near her enclosure close to closing time. A later police investigation, backed by a partial shoe print found on the enclosure railing and toxicology reports showing alcohol and marijuana in the victim's systems, concluded that the group had likely been taunting the tiger from atop the railing just before the attack. Tatiana killed Sousa within feet of the enclosure, then traveled roughly 300 yards across the zoo grounds to a cafe where she mauled both brothers before responding police officers shot and killed her. The city settled with the Sousa family confidentially in 2009 and separately paid the Dhaliwal brothers $900,000 in a wrongful injury settlement. Federal inspectors confirmed the wall height had violated safety standards for years, and the zoo rebuilt the exhibit from scratch, adding electrified wiring and raising the wall before ever housing another tiger there again, nearly 4 years later. Provoked or not, a tiger is still a tiger, and the next case involves an animal most people would never think to fear at all: the family dog. Number 5. Jacqueline Duran's dog-sitting job that changed everything. On December 23, 2021, the day before her 22nd birthday, University of Texas at Dallas, student Jacqueline Durand arrived at a home in Coppell, Texas, to dog-sit for a couple, Dr. Justin Bishop and his wife Ashley, while they were out of town. She had met their dogs once before without incident. The only unusual detail was a handwritten sign on the front door: "Crazy dogs, please don't knock or ring the bell. Call or text instead." Durand had been told the dogs would be crated whenever the family was away. That day, they were not. The moment she opened the front door, 2 of the family's 3 dogs, a German Shepherd mix named Lacey and a Pit Bull mix named Bender, rushed her without provocation, knocking her to the ground. What followed was one of the most severe dog maulings ever documented in the United States. The dogs tore off both of Durand's ears, her nose, and most of the skin below her eyes, inflicting somewhere between 800 and 1,000 individual bite wounds across her body. The attack came within millimeters of severing her carotid artery. Because the front door had been left open, the home's security alarm triggered automatically, alerting the Bishops, who called a neighbor, who called 911. But when police and paramedics arrived, the dogs were still aggressive enough to keep them from entering the house, and body camera footage later showed them trying to attack responding officers as well. It took 37 minutes for emergency responders to get inside. By then, Durand had lost 30% of her body's blood volume, and officers found dried blood, torn clothing, and pieces of tissue on the floor when they finally reached her. She underwent a 7-hour emergency surgery and was placed in a medically induced coma for over a week followed by 8 weeks in the hospital, and, in the years since, 17 separate facial reconstruction surgeries. In January 2022, Duran sued the bishops for negligence and premises liability, seeking more than $1 million in damages and arguing the crazy dog sign proved the family already knew how dangerous the animals were. Because Texas follows what is known as a one-bite rule, victims of a dog attack generally have to prove the owner already knew, or reasonably should have known, about an animal's dangerous tendencies before they can recover damages, which is exactly what her legal team built the case around. A municipal judge ordered both dogs euthanized, and Duran's case, along with a GoFundMe that has since raised over $68,000, drew national attention after she spoke publicly on CBS Mornings, describing the moment she felt her own skin hanging from her face and thought she was going to die. As recently as January 2026, more than 4 years after the attack, she posted that she had undergone yet another surgery, this time using a tendon from her own leg to help repair her lower lip. Proof that for some survivors, recovery never fully closes. Domesticated dogs cause far more attacks worldwide than any zoo animal ever will. But the next stories on this list return to the animal most people fear the most on sight, and prove that fear does not always predict the outcome. Number 4. Harambe. On May 28, 2016, a 3-year-old boy slipped through a barrier at the Cincinnati Zoo's Gorilla World exhibit and fell nearly 15 feet into the moat below. Harambe, a 17-year-old 400-pound western lowland silverback, immediately approached the unconscious child. For several tense minutes, video shows Harambe standing over the boy, at times appearing to shield him from the zoo's other gorillas, and at other times violently dragging and throwing him through the shallow water as the crowd screamed above. Zoo staff recalled the enclosure's 2 female gorillas within moments, but Harambe would not leave the boy's side. With no way to safely tranquilize him in time, and Harambe's behavior becoming increasingly unpredictable, the zoo's dangerous animal response team made the call to shoot and kill him to guarantee the child's survival. The boy was recovered with no life-threatening injuries and released from the hospital that night. The decision ignited a global firestorm. Millions debated online whether the shooting was necessary, whether Harambe had been protecting the child or endangering him, and whether the boy's mother should face charges. The local prosecutor ultimately declined to charge her, explaining that the boy had simply slipped away for a moment while she was looking after her other 3 children. A federal inspection later found that the exhibit's barrier had, in fact, failed to meet required safety standards on the day of the incident. Number 3. Jambo, the gorilla who chose to guard instead of attack. On August 31st, 1986, at what is now Jersey's Durrell Wildlife Park, 5-year-old Levon Merritt leaned too far over a railing to get a better look at the gorillas below and fell straight into the enclosure, cracking his skull and breaking his arm on impact. He lay motionless on the ground as horrified visitors and his own family watched from above, certain they were about to witness a tragedy. Instead, Jambo, the enclosure's dominant silverback, slowly approached the unconscious boy, stood over him, and physically blocked the other gorillas from coming any closer. He gently stroked Levon's back, the way ethologists would later describe as an unmistakably protective, almost parental gesture. When Levon regained consciousness and began to cry, Jambo and the rest of the troop calmly retreated into an indoor enclosure on their own, giving paramedic Brian Fox room to jump in and treat the boy before he was lifted to safety. Levon recovered fully, with no lasting injuries beyond the broken bones from the fall itself. Footage of Jambo's behavior aired around the world and did more to reshape the public image of gorillas, from King Kong-style monsters to intelligent, empathetic animals, than almost any nature documentary before it. The zoo's longtime head of apes, who had worked closely with Jambo for years, said afterward that he never believed the child was in any real danger from the gorillas at all, and that Jambo's reaction was simply him doing what came naturally to a calm, socially secure silverback. Jambo died in 1992 of a chest hemorrhage, and a bronze statue of him, later sold at auction for over £18,000 before returning to Jersey, still stands at the park today. Levon Merritt, now an adult with children of his own who share his fascination with animals, has said in interviews that he remains forever thankful to the gorilla who, in the one moment that could have gone either way, chose to protect him instead. Jambo's calm was remarkable, But the next case shows that even the most intelligent and empathetic animals can be very difficult to predict. Number 2. Tyke, the elephant who ran out of patience. On August 20th, 1994, a 20-year-old African elephant named Tyke was performing with Circus International inside Honolulu's Neil Bladel Center when, in front of a packed arena, she turned on her trainer, Alan Campbell, killing him, and then trampled her groomer, Dallas Beckwith, leaving him critically injured. Tyke then broke through a barrier and bolted out of the arena entirely. What followed was 30 minutes of pure chaos through the streets of Honolulu's Kaka'ako district during afternoon rush hour. Tyke charged at pedestrians, smashed into parked cars, and injured more than a dozen bystanders as panicked crowds scattered in every direction. Honolulu police pursued her on foot and in vehicles, eventually cornering her and firing somewhere around 86 shots before she finally collapsed and died from massive blood loss and nerve damage. The entire pursuit was captured on video by news crews and bystanders, and it remains one of the most widely documented captive animal rampages in modern history. What came out afterward made the story far darker than a simple animal attack. An autopsy on Campbell, Tyke's trainer, found both cocaine and alcohol in his system. Tyke's former handlers described Campbell as a punishment-based trainer with a documented history of abuse complaints against him, and it later emerged that Tyke had already tried to escape 3 separate times in the year before her death, breaking loose during performances in Pennsylvania, North Dakota, and Canada. Animal rights investigators who studied her case afterward concluded that her final rampage was not a random act of aggression, but the culmination of years of mistreatment finally boiling over in public. Her death became the subject of the documentary Tyke, Elephant Outlaw, and directly influenced Hawaii's later push to ban wild-performing animals from the islands entirely. Not every animal on this list turned violent because of how it was treated. The final story is proof that even a wild-born predator, raised with patience instead of punishment, can choose gentleness on its own. Number 1. Binti Jua, the gorilla who carried a stranger's child to safety. On August 16, 1996, almost exactly 10 years after Jambo's famous act of protection an ocean away, a 3-year-old boy climbed over a railing at Chicago's Brookfield Zoo and plunged 18 feet into the zoo's gorilla enclosure, knocking himself unconscious on the concrete floor below in front of a crowd of horrified visitors. Binti Jua, an 8-year-old female western lowland gorilla who was carrying her own 17-month-old baby, Kula, on her back at the time, approached the motionless boy within seconds. Rather than reacting with alarm, she gently scooped him up, cradling him in her arms the same way she cradled her own infant, and carried him roughly 60 feet across the enclosure directly to a door used by zookeepers, keeping the rest of the troop away from him the entire time. She sat with him near the door until keepers arrived and gently passed him through to paramedics. The boy recovered fully within days. Binti Jua became an overnight global celebrity, landing on the cover of Newsweek and receiving formal commendations for her actions. And footage of the rescue is still shown in psychology and animal behavior courses today. Scientists who studied the case afterward found a fascinating mechanism behind her instinct. Keepers at Brookfield Zoo had specifically trained Binti Jua in nurturing behavior years earlier, using a doll to teach her how to cradle and care for an infant after her own mother had failed to raise her properly. Her heroic reaction, in other words, was not pure instinct alone. It was instinct sharpened by exactly the kind of patient, intelligent training that Tyke, in the story before this one, never received. Between the two of them, Tyke and Binti Jua make the same point from opposite directions. How an animal is raised and treated shapes what it becomes far more than the species it was born into ever could. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more fascinating stories.